What up, Facebook peoples? What's going on up in here? Hey, so I am downtown LA getting ready for my show. And pretty stoked about tonight because tonight I am having Daphne Springs. If you've never heard of her, check her out, Daphne Springs. She's going to be the headliner for the show tonight. She has performed recently on HBO. So pretty stoked about that. Can't lie, I'm probably a little bit nervous, but thanks to CBD for hooking me up. But anyhow, wanted to talk to you about a few different things, very different things, but wanted to talk to you about something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Now, most of you may know that I grew up in Christianity. I used to be a pastor of a church and youth pastor and all that kind of good stuff. And probably the last 10 years, I've kind of taken kind of a backseat to that and kind of just exploring different ways of understanding religion, but also understanding spirituality and not just understanding it for myself, but also from a sociological perspective. That's what I got my master's in. So I'm very intrigued by what it means to believe and what it means to believe in something outside of ourself, and most of our lives are lived that way. Most of our lives, we live in such a way that we feel connected to something outside of us, whether it be an ultimate good, whether it be love, something along those lines where I think we have come to kind of define what it means to believe in a God. But I think when we use God, no matter whether you believe or don't believe or are an atheist or somebody who's into spirituality and so on and so forth, I think you have to realize is that we are all as humans trapped in language. We are trapped in language. And if we think about that in terms of idealism, okay? Idealism in the philosophical sense, right? Because idealism in the typical everyday living life sense would be, hey, I'm always happy. I always see the positive. My glass is half full. That's not the idealism I'm talking about. I'm talking about philosophical idealism. Believing that there is a meta understanding of reality, believing in meta experiences, believing that there's something that lies beyond reality, right? Kind of metaphysical. And so, philosophical idealism is a little bit different than our typical everyday idealism, right? And it's good to understand that distinguishing feature about those two ideas. So, the whole concept here that I'm dealing with is that language in and of itself is something that's outside of ourselves. We don't somehow birth language, right? Language births us. And what I mean to say by that is that we rely on language to define us. We rely on language to determine the coordinates of our ethics, the coordinates of our belief, the coordinates of understanding and interacting with one another. So language is outside of us, right? And metaphysics and idealism and philosophical idealism rely, interpret, and interact with things that are outside of themselves, right? Now, a materialist is a person who doesn't really believe that there is anything other than what you see. So what you see is what you get. That's what a materialist is. Not a materialist in the, I live in a material world, right? Not that materialism, not the money-based materialism, but the idea that materialism is something that we all somehow attribute reality to, meaning like what you see is what you get, right? So just keep in mind, philosophical idealism, when I use it in this context, I'm talking about basically trying to understand reality in such a way where what you see is not what you get. Whereas materialism is what you see is what you get, right? So, if we go that route with language, then language is something outside of us. Language is something that births us. We don't birth language. We don't create language, right? Now, a simple example would be when you are born. When you're born, you are introduced to language. In fact, that's when parents get excited and they practically crap themselves out of excitement because, oh my gosh, she said a word, he said a word. And it could be any word. I mean, you can cuss, you can do whatever. You can be like, hey, ejaculation. Oh my gosh, my little Timmy said the word, right? It doesn't matter what the word is. But the reality is that we are birthed out of language. And so language is something that is the first thing that we encounter when we are coming into the world, when right? And again, remember, language births us. We do not birth language, right? We rely on language to define ourselves. So what does that have to do with God? Now, we always have this schism in society between belief, non-belief, atheism, non-atheism, and so on and so forth. And when I say society, I'm not just meaning America. I'm talking about globally, right? Because you have all of these different ways of identifying with belief, right? Worldwide, okay? So, that should really not even be an argument, because belief is fundamentally what we're talking about here. Whether you believe in God or whether you don't believe in God, what is the commonality between those two phrases? Belief, right? You have belief. So we all believe in something, even if it's nothing, right? But again, back to the idea that language births us. Language is something outside of us. Language is a form of philosophical idealism, meaning we know that when we say something, we don't necessarily mean it. Right? Now you get the people who are literalists and you get the people who are saying, no, I mean what I say. But the reality is that when you say something, you are referring to something that isn't real, right? You are referring to something that is outside of yourself. One philosopher, she said, her name is Julia Kristeva. She says, language exiles us from the object of our desire, right? And so the idea is that when you rely on language to dictate to you how reality is, you ostracize yourself because that idea itself, let's say, for example, I call this a snack bag, right? This is a snack bag, whatever you want to call it. Well, I've already limited the potential of what this is, what it could be, what it should be, and so on and so forth, right? Now, a lot of you may be hearing me and saying, that's just fucking ludicrous because, well, we've all agreed upon this idea of it being a snack bag, right? But the reality is, and I've just said the major problem is that we've all agreed to this. We've all agreed to the idea that language is what it means. So when we say snack bag, that is a snack bag, right? So that would be more of an idealistic perspective, meaning trying to understand that what we say is what we mean, but realizing that at the end of the day, when we say snack bag, we know that we're referring to the idea, not to the bag itself. And this is the same thing with God. Belief, God, right? We know that when we say the word God, no matter what you believe, no matter how much of a literalist you are, at the end of the day, there's a deepened part of you that realizes this. That when you say God, you're referring to an idea of God. That when those who wrote the Quran, those who wrote the Torah, those who wrote the Bible, when they wrote these texts, one, they didn't consider they were going to be holy in the way in which we now define that. Two, they realized, and this is what seems to be a massive deficit, especially in Western culture, is that we are too literal, right? We're saying, no, the Bible is what it is. The Torah is what it is. The Quran is what it is. And that's not the case, right? And so the idea here, and the idea that I'm trying to get home to you, is that no matter what you believe, no matter how spiritual or lack of spirituality you may think you have, the reality is that you believe in something that is outside of yourself. And that belief in something outside of yourself is a belief in God. Now, some of you are going to be really offended by that. But you have to ask yourself, why am I offended by that? Because when I use the word God, I'm not using it in the similar religious context. I'm saying God can be goodness, God can be love, God can be romance, God can be whatever you want in that moment. We all believe in something that exists outside of ourselves. We all want something that exists outside of ourselves. We want to transcend ourselves. So this belief, or this need to believe, is this fundamental desire to want something outside of ourselves, right? And to realize that there is something more here than reality, which is basically philosophical idealism in a nutshell. So, the idea, sorry, my light just went off in the car. I feel like I'm doing taxi cab confessions. All right. Don't watch that with kids. And not that I have, but just consider that as wise advice. Little fortune cookie for your day. But anyhow, it's very important to realize that when people say, I don't believe in whatever that is, they're saying they're talking about a very specific context of what that blank is, whether it be God or Allah or whatever that belief is, a goodness, love. It's a particular perspective that they themselves understand, and their understanding of it is basically a creation of their conditioning and environment and parenting when they were children, and so on and so forth, and their culture and their experience of that idea itself. And so the idea is that we need to realize that there is that belief is innate to being human, right? Belief is innate. It is something that we all do. So again, going back to what I said earlier, if you believe in God or you don't believe in God, the fundamental thing that connects both of those ideas is belief. We all believe. We believe in something, even if it's nothing. And remember, we never birth language. We don't just walk out of the womb and be like, blah, 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 and I made up these awesome words and everybody's catching on like wildfire and I'm trending like Twitter. Hashtag new language, right? Never. Language is always borrowed. Ideas are always borrowed. The idea of goodness, the idea of God, the idea of war, whatever it is, all of these are particular concepts, right? And they're just concepts. And that's what I think, especially like people like atheists who are so staunch against it, let's say like Dawkins, right, needs to realize that they're emulating the same closed-mindedness that you'd get typically from people who are very committed to their belief system. Dogmatic, right? They embrace dogma, okay? So that's the idea here, is that essentially everybody believes, right? And that's the fundamental connection between saying I don't believe or I do believe in something, whatever it be, God, goodness, love, truth, beauty, whatever it is that we all believe. To be human is to believe in something even if it's nothing, right? And again, the thing about language is that, language births us. We use language to define ourselves and to define our beliefs and what we don't believe, right? But it's very limiting to use language. So it's very limiting to use the idea of God. I personally don't like to use the notion of God because I think it's too limiting. I might consider myself a spiritual person, but I don't necessarily attribute myself to any particular religion because I think life is itself a form of spirituality. I think living and breathing and interacting with humanity and so on and so forth and trying to leave this world a better place, that is being spiritual, right? And so it doesn't rely on a dogma, a belief system, a book, or anything like that for that shape of matter, right? And so I think it's very important to understand that when we talk about belief, that we all do it. We all believe. We all don't believe in something. We all do believe in something. And that language limits us in what we say. And so a lot of people, even atheists or non-atheists, are really caught up in language. Like, no, this is who God is. This is what God is. This is how God acts. But then you have the people who are a little bit more loose and a little bit more fluid, and I'm there right now, and I don't think you can conceptualize an idea of God. I don't think you can be dogmatic about it. I don't think you can say this is what it is, right? Because we just don't know enough, and language limits us. Language limits our ability to actually know reality. Because limiting, like I said, and I quoted this, is trying to understand that language only can be an idea in which we all... Sorry, somebody's distracting me. But anyhow, language is limited by itself. Because when you call something, it relies upon your idea of that something. So you already bring your own baggage, your idea, your concept, or your upbringing towards that notion anyways. But then also that object has no potential outside of that word, right? And so you need to fully understand that when we talk about God, we don't mean God. Does any of this make sense? Like if it does, just shout out and add to the conversation and so on and so forth, right? Because fundamentally, this kind of concept of belief and belief in something outside of ourselves is fundamental to who we are as humans. So no matter whether you say you don't believe in God, you believe in something like God. You believe in concept that fulfills the role of God. Like whether it be an infinite goodness or whether you believe, you to be an ethical person, whatever it is, there's something outside of yourself that you are driven by, even if it's nothing, even if it's nihilism, that's still outside of yourself, right? And so it's good to remember this when we're kind of going through life and we become so dogmatic about our perspective or whatever it might be, right? So what do you guys think? Leave your thoughts there. Now I'm going to switch gears because this is more related to the show I'm doing tonight, and got somebody on, from HBO, Daphne Springs. Again, I said at the beginning, boom, so stoked about her coming and gigging. But essentially, like, I'm going to be doing a new show, and I'm talking about like a new YouTube show or a new Facebook show or a new Instagram series, and they'll probably be like 3 to 4 minutes max, or maybe even a minute, 1 minute series on Instagram. And so I was thinking, hey, you know what? I want to play with the idea of trying to basically kind of interact with the world, but like from an eye of awesomeness. Meaning, like the world is just filled with things to be in awe about, a blade of grass or a dirt or a worm. But then find kind of like really cool, fun, and be funny, by the way, while I'm doing this. Funny information about it, or fun information about it, informative, but also just kind of like, hey, call it awesome world or something like that. Or going back to kind of personifying, things in our culture. Like I did one on Mr. Beachbody that really kind of really got a lot of interaction. And so, that was kind of making fun of, fitness and all of this kind of stuff. But I become a character like a gym coach or something like that and just take it to the extreme. So those are a couple concepts I'm working with, but I need your input. What do you think about those two concepts? Is there anything I should tweak or add, or anything that you're like, hey, what? I really like that concept, but hey, what if you added this? Or what if you didn't do this? Or whatever it is. So share below, DM me. Thanks, guys, for listening. And I'm going to have an awesome show tonight, and I will be filming it. So hopefully you'll get to see it soon. Thanks, guys, for listening. Peace.